Hey, you can't be here. Move along.
I'm
Now.
in a public park during open hours. I'm not breaking the law.
I didn't ask for an argument. I asked for ID.
You have no reasonable suspicion. I do not consent.
So now you're refusing orders? Turn around. Hands behind your
I am
back.
Brannigan was 29 years old, 5 years into a career that had been marked by a high number of self-initiated stops and a disturbing amount of citizen complaints that had been dismissed by a lenient union review board. He parked his cruiser on the grass, a violation of city ordinance in itself, and adjusted his utility belt. He saw a black male in a wheelchair lingering near the Vietnam War memorial wall. The dispatch call had been vague. A resident in the high-end condos across the street had reported, "Someone looking suspicious near the statues." That was it. No crime, no threat, just existence. But for Brannigan, that was enough. As he walked across the manicured lawn, his hand rested habitually near his holster. He didn't see a man paying respects to fallen brothers. He saw a problem to be removed. Before we get into the details of this infuriating encounter, I need you to take a second. Look at where you are right now. Imagine you are visiting a grave or a memorial for someone you loved and a stranger with a gun demands you justify your presence. It's a nightmare scenario, but for many, it's a Tuesday. If you believe our veterans deserve respect and that police power must be checked, hit that subscribe button right now. You need to see how this ends. Colonel Thorne didn't hear Brannigan approach immediately. He was focused on the name Elijah Washington etched into the brass plate. Elijah had been his radio operator in 1983. Thorne came here every Tuesday at 11:00 a.m. to polish the brass and talk to his old friend. It was a ritual. It was therapy. "Hey, buddy, you can't sleep here." The voice was loud, jarring, and dripping with condescension. Thorne stopped polishing. He didn't turn around immediately. He carefully folded his polishing cloth and placed it in the small saddlebag attached to his customized titanium wheelchair. He took a breath, centering himself before engaging the wheel locks and pivoting the chair to face the officer. Thorne looked up. He saw the name tag, Brannigan, and the aggressive stance. Thorne's face was a map of lived experience, a scar running along his jawline eyes that had seen the worst of humanity and remained steady. "I'm not sleeping, officer." Thorne said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that had once commanded battalions. "I am maintaining the memorial." Brannigan smirked. He looked at the bottle of brass polish and the rag. He didn't see a community service. He saw paraphernalia. "Yeah, well, we've had reports of vagrants using this park to shoot up and harass residents. I'm going to need you to move along." Thorne's hands rested on his lap. He didn't fidget. He didn't look down. "I am a tax-paying resident of this city, officer. I am in a public park during open hours. I am not violating any ordinances." Brannigan's smile faded. He wasn't used to vagrants using words like ordinances. He stepped closer, invading Thorne's personal space, a tactical intimidation move that usually worked on the desperate and the addicted. "I didn't ask for a law lecture, pal. I said move along. Actually, before you do, let me see some ID. We need to make sure you don't have any warrants." This was the pivot point. The moment where a good officer would have realized his mistake, apologized, and thanked the veteran for cleaning the memorial. But Brannigan wasn't a good officer. He was a bully with a badge, and he had just picked a fight with a man whose thesis on asymmetrical warfare was required reading at the War College. Thorne remained perfectly still. He knew exactly what was happening. It was a Terry stop and investigatory detention. But for a Terry stop to be legal, the officer needed reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime had been committed, was being committed, or was about to be committed. "Officer Brannigan," Thorne said, reading the name tag aloud to signal he was documenting the interaction. "I am declining your request. I am not operating a motor vehicle. I am not suspected of a specific crime. Unless you can articulate a reasonable suspicion based on facts, not hunches, I am under no legal obligation to identify myself." Brannigan's face flushed a deep, angry red. The air in the park seemed to grow heavier. A few pedestrians walking their dogs on the nearby path stopped. They sensed the tension. A woman in her 50s stopped pushing her stroller and watched. Thorne noticed the audience. He hoped they were paying attention. "You want reasonable suspicion?" Brannigan snapped his hand, moving to his radio. "You fit the description of a suspicious person reported in the area. And now you're refusing a lawful order. That's obstruction. A description of a black man in a wheelchair is not a description of a suspect officer. That is a demographic profile." Thorne corrected him, his voice remaining level, which only seemed to infuriate Brannigan more. "And asserting my Fourth Amendment rights is not obstruction. The Supreme Court has been very clear on this. I suggest you call your supervisor before you make a mistake that you cannot undo." Brannigan laughed, a short, nervous sound. "I don't need a supervisor to handle a trespasser. You're detained. Give me the ID or I take you in and we figure out who you are the hard way." Thorne leaned back in his chair. He looked Brannigan in the eye. "I am not trespassing on public property. I have committed no crime. I am free to go, or you are detaining me illegally." "Which is it?" The gathered crowd was growing. A man in a business suit had pulled out his phone and was filming. Brannigan saw the phone. Instead of checking his behavior, he doubled down, convinced that backing off now would make him look weak in front of the civilians. He decided that he was going to teach this cripple a lesson about respect. "Okay, have it your way," Brannigan said, unclipping his handcuffs. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "I cannot turn around, officer. I am paraplegic, and my chair is customized for my specific injuries. If you attempt to remove me from it, you will cause me significant physical harm," Thorne stated. He wasn't pleading. He was stating a fact for the record, for the camera he knew was watching. Brannigan didn't listen. He moved behind the wheelchair. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and disorderly conduct." He grabbed Thorne's left wrist and wrenched it backward. Thorne winced a sharp intake of breath through his nose as the torque hit an old shrapnel injury in his shoulder. "Officer, stop!" the man in the business suit yelled from the sidewalk. "He's in a wheelchair. What are you doing?" Brannigan ignored the bystander. "Stop resisting," Brannigan shouted, playing to the camera, pretending a struggle was happening where there was none. Thorne was not resisting. He went limp, a passive resistance technique he had been trained in to minimize injury. Brannigan struggled to get the cuffs on because of the angle of the chair. Frustrated, the officer made a decision that would sicken the jury months later. He released the brake on the wheelchair and spun it roughly to get better leverage, nearly tipping it over. "I am warning you," Thorne said through gritted teeth, the pain in his shoulder radiating down his spine. "You are damaging expensive medical equipment and violating my civil rights. My name is Colonel Marcus Thorne, United States Marine Corps retired. Check your ego, son." Brannigan paused for a microsecond at the word colonel, but his adrenaline was too high. He didn't believe it. He saw a man in sweatpants. "Sure you are. And I'm General Patton. You're going downtown." Brannigan finally managed to click the cuffs onto Thorne's wrists, forcing his arms into an agonizing position behind the rigid backrest of the chair. Then came the logistics. Brannigan realized he couldn't put the wheelchair in the back of his sedan. He called for a transport van, but the dispatcher said it was 20 minutes out. Impatient and angry, Brannigan decided he would assist Thorne into the back of the cruiser and leave the chair. "Get up," Brannigan commanded. "I just told you I am a paraplegic," Thorne said, sweat beading on his forehead from the pain. "I cannot stand." Brannigan rolled his eyes. "Fine, I'll help you." He grabbed Thorne by the upper arms and hauled him out of the chair. Thorne's legs' dead weight dragged across the asphalt. The toe of his right sneaker caught on the curb, twisting his foot at a sickening angle. Thorne didn't scream, but he let out a guttural groan. The bystanders were shouting now. "He's disabled. You're hurting him." The woman with the stroller was on her phone calling 911 to report a police officer. Brannigan shoved Thorne into the back seat of the cruiser. Thorne's legs wouldn't bend properly to fit. Brannigan slammed the door twice before he managed to jam Thorne's limbs inside. The expensive custom titanium wheelchair worth $8,000 was left sitting on the grass. Brannigan tossed it into the trunk, not bothering to fold it properly, hearing the frame crunch as he slammed the lid. The drive to the precinct was short. Brannigan blasted the air conditioning, trying to cool his own temper. Thorne sat in the back, handcuffed in excruciating pain, his legs rapidly swelling. He closed his eyes and began to memorize every turn, every speed bump, every second of the timeline. He wasn't a prisoner. He was an operative gathering intelligence. He needed to survive the next hour so he could destroy this man's career legally. When Brannigan arrived at the precinct, he dragged Thorne out of the car with the same lack of care. He wheeled him into the booking area in a borrowed, broken-down transport chair from the garage because he couldn't get Thorne's custom chair out of the trunk easily. The booking room was busy. Officers were typing reports, drinking coffee, chatting. The atmosphere changed the moment Brannigan wheeled Thorne in. The desk sergeant was Thomas Miller, a 58-year-old bear of a man who had served in the Army before joining the force 30 years ago. He looked over the counter and saw Brannigan pushing a black man in a hospital chair, handcuffed, wearing sweatpants. Miller's eyes narrowed. He looked at the man's face. He knew that face. He had seen that face in the local paper 2 years ago when the city unveiled the new war memorial. Brannigan. Miller said, his voice low and dangerous. "What do you have there?" "Obstruction and disorderly," Brannigan said, wiping sweat from his brow. Guy wouldn't ID in the park, was acting belligerent, claimed he was some kind of colonel. Brannigan chuckled, expecting Miller to share the joke. Miller didn't laugh. He walked out from behind the high desk. He walked straight to Thorne. He looked at the wristbands, then he looked at the man. "Sir?" Miller asked. "Colonel Thorne." "Sergeant," Thorne replied calmly, though his face was gray with pain. "I believe your officer has made a significant error in judgment. My wallet is in my back pocket. I would like you to retrieve it and look at the ID card behind my driver's license." Miller nodded. He reached into Thorne's pocket with gentle hands. He pulled out the wallet. He flipped past the driver's license and found the Department of Defense Common Access card, retired status, rank colonel, and tucked behind it a laminated card indicating he was a recipient of the Silver Star and a Purple Heart. Miller looked up at Brannigan. The look was one of pure pity and disgust. "Brannigan," Miller said softly, "give me your keys." "What?" Brannigan asked, confused. "Give me your keys, now." Miller snatched the keys from the younger officer's hand and unlocked Thorne's handcuffs. "Colonel, I need to get you medical attention immediately. Did he injure you?" "My legs were dragged," Thorne said, rubbing his wrists. "And my wheelchair is currently being crushed in the trunk of his vehicle. But before we discuss medical attention, Sergeant, I want a supervisor. I want the watch commander, and I want the chief." "I'm calling them now," Miller said. He turned to Brannigan. "Go sit in the break room. Don't speak to anyone. Don't write anything. Just sit there and pray you still have a pension by tomorrow." Brannigan stood there, stunned. "Sarge, he was loitering. He refused ID. He's a decorated war hero who lost the use of his legs fighting for the Constitution you just wiped your feet on." Miller roared, his voice echoing off the cinderblock walls. "Get out of my sight." 5 minutes later, the precinct was in chaos. The watch commander had called the chief of police, Chief Robert Henderson, who was at a luncheon downtown. Henderson arrived in 12 minutes. He found Colonel Thorne sitting in the captain's office, not in a cell. Sergeant Miller had provided him with water and ice packs for his wrists. Thorne's custom wheelchair had been retrieved from the trunk. The frame was bent, the axle damaged. It sat in the corner as piece of evidence number 1. Chief Henderson was a pragmatic man. He saw the bent wheelchair. He saw the colonel's calm, furious demeanor. He saw the liability. "Colonel Thorne," Henderson began, extending a hand. "I am deeply sorry for this. This is unacceptable, doesn't begin to cover it. We are going to release you immediately. No charges will be filed. I can have an officer drive you home or to the hospital." Thorne didn't shake the chief's hand. He looked at it until Henderson awkwardly withdrew it. "Chief Henderson," Thorne said, "I don't want to ride home. I want the event number. I want the body camera footage preserved. I want the dash cam footage. I want the dispatch logs, and I want the name of the officer who arrested me. We will handle this internally, Colonel. I assure you Officer Brannigan will be disciplined." "Discipline is for a uniform violation," Thorne said, cold as ice. "This was a violation of my civil rights. It was assault. It was battery. And it was kidnapping. I am not going to let you handle this internally. I am going to make this a matter of public record. I want digital copies of all evidence provided to my attorney by 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. Do I have your word, or do I need to call the FBI Civil Rights Division right now from this office?" Henderson swallowed hard. He knew who Thorne was now. He knew Thorne sat on the board of Veterans Affairs. He knew Thorne had the mayor's personal cell number. "You'll have everything, Colonel." Thorne left the station an hour later. He didn't take a police ride. He called his wife, a retired surgeon who came in their accessible van. When she saw the bruises on his wrists and the bent wheelchair, she didn't cry. She went silent, a dangerous protective silence. They went straight to the ER to document the injuries: soft tissue damage, a hairline fracture in the toe that had caught the curb, and nerve compression in the wrists. By Wednesday morning, the lawsuit was filed. Thorne v. City of San Diego et al. The document was a masterpiece of legal writing drafted by the city's top civil rights firm, who had taken the case pro bono within 10 minutes of hearing the story. The allegations included unlawful detention, excessive force violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and racial profiling. But the real explosion happened when the video released. Thorne's team didn't wait. The moment the city turned over the footage, they released it to the press. The video of Brannigan dumping a paralyzed veteran out of his chair and dragging him across the sidewalk hit the internet like a bomb. It was viewed 4 million times in the first 24 hours. The image of the empty wheelchair sitting on the grass while the cruiser drove away became a symbol. The media narrative was relentless. Hero treated like trash. Wheelchair war veteran arrested for existing while black. Reporters dug into Brannigan's file. They found what the Internal Affairs Division had ignored: 6 complaints in 3 years, 4 involving black men, 2 involving homeless individuals, 1 involving a deaf woman whom Brannigan had arrested for ignoring commands because she couldn't hear him. The pattern was undeniable. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was a bloodbath for the city. Thorne's lawyers deposed Brannigan. Under oath, the young officer crumbled. He admitted he didn't know the specific criteria for a Terry stop. He admitted he assumed Thorne was homeless because of his clothes. He admitted he hadn't seen any drug paraphernalia despite his initial claims. The city attorney watched the deposition and signaled to the mayor settle. Now, they couldn't put Brannigan on a stand in front of a jury. A jury would give Thorne $10 million just out of spite. The city offered $500,000. Thorne rejected it. They offered $800,000. Thorne rejected it. "It's not about the money," Thorne told his lawyer. "It's about the cost. It has to hurt enough that they change the training." Finally, the city caved. They agreed to a settlement of $1.2 million. But Thorne had non-monetary conditions. Brannigan had to be terminated. The city had to agree to report the termination to the state post board to decertify him, ensuring he could never be a cop again in that state. And the department had to implement a new training module on interacting with citizens with disabilities designed by a committee Thorne would select. On the day the settlement was signed, Brannigan was already gone. He had been fired 2 weeks prior, the union refusing to fight for him after the drag video made him a national pariah. He was working at a warehouse loading boxes, a job he would eventually lose when his coworkers found out who he was. Colonel Thorne took the $1.2 million check. He wrote 2 checks that same day. The first, for $600,000, went to the Legal Defense Fund for Disabled Veterans, a nonprofit he helped establish. The second, for $400,000, went to the local Boys and Girls Club to build a new tech center. He kept enough to replace his wheelchair and cover his medical bills. The Thorn Protocol is now standard training for the police department. It requires officers to have specific articulable facts before approaching a disabled person and mandates that mobility devices be treated as extensions of the person's body. The footage of that day is still online. It serves as a grim reminder of what happens when authority goes unchecked. But it also serves as a reminder of the dignity of resistance. Colonel Thorn returned to the park 3 months later. He had a new wheelchair. He brought his polishing cloth. He sat in front of Elijah Washington's nameplate polishing the brass until it shone like gold. A rookie police officer walked by on foot patrol. He saw the colonel. He didn't ask for ID. He didn't tell him to move. He stopped, stood at attention, and saluted. Colonel Thorn didn't look up, but he nodded. The system didn't work because it wanted to. It worked because one man refused to be broken, refused to be intimidated, and had the courage to force the system to look in the mirror. What hits you hardest about this story? Is it the officer's arrogance or the fact that it took a colonel's rank to get justice when a regular citizen might have been ignored? We need to talk about this. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe that badge cams should be mandatory and uneditable for every officer in America, like this video and subscribe. We are building a community that demands accountability. Until next time, stay safe and know your rights.